Now, according to new figures released by the Office of National Statistics, there has been a sharp rise in migration of 260,000 in the year to June. That's a hike of 43%. The new figures released today show that British Prime Minister David Cameron has all but certainly missed his promise of getting net migration down to the tens of thousands. More details in this report.
Overall net migration is on the rise. The data published by the Office for National Statistics derails the government's promise to bring down the number of migrants to tens of thousands by the next election. The ONS is describing it as statistically significant. In a year to June, net migration to the UK rocketed to 260,000. The published data puts further pressure on Prime Minister David Cameron, who had given a no ifs, no buts pledge to get net migration down to below 100,000. The Home Secretary Theresa May revealed in recent days that the predicted figures had been blown off course due to internal EU migration. Nonetheless, the UK Independence Party will use this ammunition well as fuel to boost their rhetoric that the only way to curb immigration is to quit the EU. Although an increase in immigration from the European Union was up 45,000, the number of migrants from outside the EU was up by 30,000. For his part, Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg said the Conservatives' failure to meet their target for reducing net migration will undermine public confidence in the immigration system. This was a Conservative preoccupation. They made that promise, they have now broken that promise, and they will now have to suffer the embarrassment of having done so. Immigration is a dominant issue in British politics and has already cost the Conservatives 2 seats. These latest figures will certainly be another thorn in Cameron's side.
Joining us live from our London studios is political analyst Euan Grant. Euan, thank you for joining us. Now, the big question is, could these figures cost Cameron the next general election?
Well, the answer is, I think, yes. I personally suspect not, because people in the voting booths may pull back from the brink and look not at what UKIP can offer, but the response of the other main parties. But who knows? The answer is very definitely yes.
Figures show an increase of 45% in EU migration. Surely this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Isn't migration good for the country's economy?
Well, the jury is still out on that, and I would refer you to the excellent reports accompanying previous studies which have been produced earlier this month. The answer, I would suggest, the consensus is, in the short term, yes, because it brings in vigorous, young, enthusiastic workers. Longer term, the jury is still out, and to their credit, the BBC, among others, have been highlighting that point as the new arrivals age and become dependent. The devil is in the detail, and I think ONS and its critics need to up their game a bit to really look at short, medium and long-term effects. Certainly it does seem at the moment short-term positive. It's a question of how long that short-term is going to be.
Now, we know that Theresa May preempted the publication of these figures by suggesting that Cameron's well-meant plans were blown off course because of internal EU migration. Shouldn't they have anticipated this increase? And so what were Cameron's promises based on?
Yes, that's a good point. Yes, quite frankly, they should have anticipated this. There does tend to be a reality in government, because it's big government, to extrapolate existing trends and not particularly well pick up on new developments. The pledge, frankly, as I mentioned on one of your programs a few weeks ago, should really, I think, have been abandoned earlier. It was unrealistic. Good politics to Theresa May for getting the alibi in first and softening the blow, but it should have been anticipated. The figures do quite clearly demonstrate that while Bulgarian and Romanian full migration rights is a factor, bear in mind that these figures only cover the first 6 months of their new freedoms. It is not in itself hugely significant. So this is a wider phenomenon, probably related to economic difficulties in Europe.
Now, these figures will no doubt enforce UKIP's stance on leaving the EU. What will that mean for Cameron and his renewed negotiations on the EU membership?
Well, I think the Prime Minister's position is difficult, but not impossible. And in fairness, Nick Clegg, playing party politics in the points you mentioned earlier, but also trying to be statesmanlike in his recent comments in the Financial Times about restricting benefits and tightening up entitlement to benefits. I think the Prime Minister and the British government in general, and it will be whichever government forms the administration after the election, may be onto something in that they may be making progress. It will be much slower and harder, but I think the secret is still to negotiate with the EU to win time, because the EU countries are suffering from this as well, a lopsided migration from south to north.
Euan Grant, political analyst, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.